draw your attention to this lectern that I'm using. This was the newel post from the old president's home on the A&M campus. And when it burned, I understand, Fred Bryson, and who some of y'all knew, and some others went over there with a saw and cut it out as they were destroying the building, and they made it into this nice lectern. And so this is what's left of the president's home on the A&M campus. And you know, it's people like me that, you know, collect all of this trivia and remind people about these little things all the time. I want to thank you for the invitation to make a presentation to the Historic Preservation Committee. The Masonic fraternities played a significant role in the lives of many men who helped shape the history of College Station, Texas A&M, and Brazos County, in the same way that it played a role in the lives of the many men who shaped the early history of Texas and the United States. The fact that our Brazos Valley Masonic Library Museum has the opportunity to make this case before you here today is especially exciting for me as I share your interest in the history of College Station and also Brazos County. But before I start with the history of Freemasonry here in the Brazos Valley, it's appropriate to cover a bit about its historical origins in Europe and its spread to the American colonies. You can't start talking about Freemasonry until you tell where it came from and why. Freemasonry had its origins among the lodges of stonemasons and architects who built the great Gothic cathedrals during the Middle Ages. Using the biblical description of the construction of King Solomon's temple as an archetype, and following the division of workmen described in the second book of Chronicles, these early lodges divided their members into three classes or degrees of membership. They had apprentices, they had fellow craftsmen, and they had master masons. The secrets of their craft they carefully guarded from the uninitiated. This was a common practice among the medieval guilds with highly skilled and technical crafts, which simply prevented shortcutting the required apprenticeship period. Over the centuries, many guilds developed ceremonies of passing from one degree to another. For the Freemasons, these ceremonies were incorporated into a system of morality in which they used allegorical legends and stories, the moral lessons and precepts of which were illustrated by the working tools of the craft, meeting each other as equals upon the level, acting uprightly by the plumb, and dealing with one another on the square, and so forth. The titles of the lodge officers were very much in keeping with the culture and traditions of the medieval trade guilds. The presiding officer was called a worshipful master. The honorific term worshipful simply means honorable in the language of late medieval Britain. The second and third officers were called wardens. The fourth and fifth officers were called deacons. And the officers that served the tables during the hours of refreshment were called stewards. The door guard, equipped with a ceremonial sword, was called the tiler. I want to tell you a little bit about that. The tiler's job was to keep away the eavesdroppers. Eavesdroppers were people that would crawl up on top of the roof and would hang from the eaves and listen at the little airspace. You see what I mean? And if he didn't keep them off the roof, they'd break the ceiling tiles. They would break the roof tiles. So guess whose job it was to replace the tiles on the roof? And so to this day, the man that stands outside the door is called a tiler. They developed elaborate passwords and secret handshakes, or grips as they were called, as a practical means of distinguishing the trained craftsmen from imposters seeking employment and wages to which they were not entitled. Again, in an age before laminated photo ID cards, this was simply a practical measure. In the late 1500s, lodges in Scotland, under the reign of King James VI, began accepting members who were not operative stonemasons. Typically, these were members of the nobility, town councilmen, and mayors, and other distinguished members of the town. These new accepted Masons acted as patrons and active participants in the ceremonies, the annual and quarterly feasts, and other social activities of the lodge. The term Freemason derives from several sources. They were free because they were not serfs, they were not indentured servants. In France, they were called francs-maçons, as they were free from taxation by the local municipalities when they were employed in the work on cathedrals, monasteries, and other church properties. And they worked in freestone, which is a type of quarry stone. In Britain, the term freestone mason became Freemason, and eventually you find the abbreviation AF and AM, which simply means ancient, free, and accepted Masons. And some of us are more ancient than others. During the 1600s, the practice of accepting these non-operative gentleman Masons spread to the rest of Britain. And as the need for thousands of operative Freemasons declined, I guess they had all the cathedrals and castles they needed at that point, so the operative craft also began to decline. And by the dawn of the 18th century, many lodges, especially in England, consisted entirely of these speculative gentleman Masons, who continued meeting upstairs in coffee houses, ale houses, and taverns, and carrying on the customs and traditions of Freemasonry purely for the benefit of its moral and social virtues. During the 18th century, the fraternity became organized under the central authority of Grand Lodges. The first such Grand Lodge was created at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House in St. Paul's Churchyard in London on St. John's Day, June the 24th, 1717, and every Masonic schoolboy, memorizes that at some point. By mid-century, there were other Grand Lodges, each operating under the leadership of a Grand Master, headquartered in Dublin in 1725, Edinburgh, Scotland in 1736, and Paris in 1743. I think the Scots were kind of reluctant to take on this Grand Lodge. They'd gone along fine without one for several hundred years, and they finally relented in 1736. Freemasonry quickly spread throughout the rest of Europe, and British regimental lodges carried it to the rest of the British Empire, to India and the Far East, to Africa, the Caribbean, and of course, to the colonies in North America. The three main tenets or the fundamental principles of Freemasonry are brotherly love, relief, and truth. And among these three principles can be found the basics for a code of conduct that were important for a new American society where people of all faiths and many cultures and backgrounds came together to build a new nation. I want to quote from the Masonic Monitor of 1775. "We are taught to regard the whole human species as one family, the high and the low, the rich and the poor, created by one almighty being and sent into the world for the aid, support, and protection of each other. On this principle, Masonry unites men of every country, sect, and opinion, and conciliates true friendship among persons who might otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance." Indeed, Freemasonry was probably the first society or organization of any kind to admit men of all faiths. This was perhaps a bit ambitious for a small fraternity of men in the early years of the 18th century, but they were undoubtedly influenced by the fact that they had emerged from 2 centuries during which religious intolerance and persecution had been the rule rather than the exception. The constitutions of 1723, compiled for the first Grand Lodge in London by the Reverend James Anderson, a Presbyterian minister from Aberdeen, Scotland, codified this ecumenical aspect of Freemasonry in Article 1 concerning God and religion, and this is what he wrote. He said, "Though in ancient times Masons were charged in every country to be of the religion of that country or nation, whatever it was, yet 'tis now thought more expedient only to oblige them to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves. that is, to be good men and true, or men of honor and honesty by whatever denomination or persuasions they may be distinguished. As Freemasonry flourished in the American colonies and later during the American Revolution and the years that followed, we find a number of our leaders were also members. George Washington, Ben Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere, John Paul Jones, and even many of their allies from Europe, like the Marquis de Lafayette. A number of the signers of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States were known to have been Freemasons, although the exact number has always been somewhat disputed, partly because of the lack of complete records that survive from that time period. George Washington, a past master of Alexandria Lodge number 22, presided over the Masonic ceremony of leveling the cornerstone of the nation's capital, September 18th, 1793. And there's a great mural of him in his Masonic apron, leveling the cornerstone and doing all of that. Masonic symbols and the virtues they represent found free expression in the formation of our country and a new order of the ages. Ceramic pitchers, porcelain punch bowls, linen tablecloths, bed quilts, cut crystal, glass flasks, silver trays, mantel clocks, rifle stocks, and powder horns, and many other household items from throughout the 1700s and the early 1800s were commonly decorated with the Masonic symbols of squares, levels, plums, trowels, gavels, 24-inch gauges, setting mauls, etc. The working tools of Freemasonry became the symbols of industry and progress, as their images called to mind the principle of laying a well-planned foundation for the new American Republic, and one that would involve the participation of every man, no matter how high or how commonplace his station in life. It was an age of revolution, followed closely on the heels of the Age of Enlightenment. From the American colonies to France and South America, men of many nations had raised the standards of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In all of this, however, Freemasonry was not so much the instrument of change as it was simply the most natural vehicle for the advocacy of those principles and those tenets that freemen had come to hold most dear. On February the 11th, 1828, Stephen F. Austin called a meeting of Freemasons at San Felipe de Austin. That was 1828. For the purpose of electing officers and petitioning the Grand Lodge of York Masons in Mexico City for a charter to form a lodge. Present at that meeting were Stephen F. Austin, who was elected the Worshipful Master, Ira Ingram, Senior Warden, H.H. League, Junior Warden, Thomas Duke, Secretary, Eli Mitchell, Joseph White, and G.B. Hall. Although the petition reached Matamoros and was to be forwarded on to Mexico City, nothing more was heard of it. By 1828, the ruling faction in Mexico feared that the liberal elements in Texas might try to gain their independence. Fully aware of the political philosophies of American Freemasons, the Mexican government of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who had swept aside the Republican Constitution of 1824, outlawed Freemasonry on October 25, 1828. The following year, Austin called another meeting of Masons where it was decided that it was impolitic and imprudent at this time to form Masonic lodges in Texas. And so that first attempt sort of went down in flames. It was 6 more years before the first successful attempt to form a lodge in Texas was finally realized. Anson Jones, who later became the last president of the Republic of Texas, recorded that on a day in March 1835, he and 4 other Masons, and I'm going to list their names, John Wharton, Asa Brigham, James A.E. Phelps, and Alexander Russell met under an oak tree in Brazos and petitioned John H. Holland, who was the Grand Master of Masons in Louisiana, for a charter to form a lodge in Texas. Now you see they're writing to Louisiana. They're not writing to Mexico anymore. In one of the most classic cases of Masonic apple polishing on record, they requested that the lodge be named Holland Lodge in the Grand Master's honor. I won't speculate on whether Grand Master Holland was influenced in granting the request, but he did. And he sent them a charter. It arrived by courier in April 1836, shortly before the Battle of San Jacinto. And if there is any Texas Mason alive that's not yet heard that Anson Jones carried the charter for Holland Lodge in his saddlebags, I haven't met him. The members of Holland Lodge, having dispersed before the approach of the Mexican army, never returned to Brazos, and the lodge, when reconvened following the war, met in the city of Houston, where it continues to this day. As the winds of Texas' War of Independence first began to blow in the fall of 1835, there were many Masons in the foremost positions of authority, both military and political. The first shot for Texas independence was fired by Eli Mitchell on October the 2nd, 1835, near the town of Gonzales. He and his friend, Colonel John H. Moore, were both Freemasons. Masonic historian Dr. James D. Carter counted 22 known Masons among the 51 signers of the Texas Declaration of Independence. Records from the early 1800s are often incomplete and sometimes non-existent. As a result, some Masonic memberships cannot be verified, and many early Masons are left uncounted. A lot of times these men became Masons back in Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia. And they came to Texas and they were involved in building a log cabin, fighting Indians, trying to start some farming and ranching. They didn't have a lot of time for a Masonic lodge at that point. So a lot of times when they were involved in signing something like this, whether or not they were Masons may have been known to each other, but it's not something that's trickled down to us today. On March the 6th, 1836, after 13 days of siege, the Alamo fell to Mexican troops under the dictator General Santa Anna, and among the approximately 200 defenders that died that day, only a handful have been reliably identified as members of our fraternity. And most of their names are familiar Texas names. James Bonham, James Bowie, David Crockett, Almiron Dickinson, John C. Clark, and William Barrett Travis. I should not forget to mention the commander of the ill-fated garrison at Goliad, Colonel James Fannin, who served as the junior deacon at the last meeting of Holland Lodge down at Brazoria before the arrival of the Mexican army. By the end of 1837, 3 lodges had been chartered in Texas, all by the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. There was Holland Lodge at Brazoria, now Houston, Milam Lodge number 40 at Nacogdoches, and McFarland Lodge number 41 in San Augustine. These numbers correspond to the Louisiana list, okay? On December 20th, 1837, when the war was over, in the city of Houston, President Sam Houston presided over a convention of the representatives of these 3 lodges and resolved to form a Grand Lodge of the Republic of Texas. 4 months later, on April 16th, 1838, they met again in Houston, formed the Grand Lodge of the Republic of Texas, and installed Anson Jones as the first Grand Master of Masons, at which time the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana over these Texas lodges was ended, making the birth date of the Grand Lodge of Texas April 16th, 1838. The Grand Lodge of Texas, ancient free and accepted Masons, remains today as the oldest corporate body in Texas. Freemasonry was a civilizing force on the Texas frontier. Not only did it install moral and social virtue among its members, but it also taught a reverence for education and the 7 liberal arts and sciences. Masonic membership was often the one common denominator among the settlers that came to Texas during the early 1800s. Men of a different background and culture often found a hearty welcome in the friendly grip of a fellow Mason's handshake. The historians and curators of the Star of the Republic Museum at Washington on the Brazos State Park had this to say about the importance of Freemasonry in early Texas. They said, Freemasonry was without doubt the single most important social institution in early Texas. The first public building in a new town was often the familiar two-story Masonic Lodge. The first floor usually served as the schoolroom and the town meeting hall, while the lodge room occupied the second floor. During the 10 years of the Republic of Texas, a number of prominent men in Texas were members of the fraternity. Dr. James D. Carter provides a near comprehensive list of the many Masons who served in public office during the days of the Republic. Suffice it to say that all 7 of the men who served as president or vice president of the Republic of Texas, David Burnett, Sam Houston, Mirabeau Lamar, Anson Jones, Lorenzo de Zavala, Edward Burleson, and Kenneth Anderson were all members. By the end of the Republic of Texas, in February 1846, a total of 26 lodges had been organized in Texas, and with the exception of Austin on the far western frontier, the westernmost towns with Masonic lodges were Matagorda on the coast, Brenham in Washington County, and Paris in the far north. During that year, 14 of the 21 surviving lodges reported a total membership of 370 members. During the next decade, growth of the fraternity in Texas was considerable, probably due to the influx of American settlers entering Texas following statehood. The first Masonic lodge here in Brazos County was Boonville Lodge, organized in 1848 under a dispensation issued by the Grand Master. The lodge received a charter in January 1849, at which time the lodge changed its name officially and became Gillespie Lodge, number 55. The members then voted to move the lodge 15 miles north to the town of Wheelock in Robertson County, and Brazos County again had no lodge. In 1852, a number of Brazos County Masons made application for a new lodge in Boonville. The names on the application included those of Harvey Mitchell, Dr. Elliott Milliken, James Price, William Boyles, William Reed, and others. A dispensation was issued 7 December 1852 for Brazos Union Lodge at Boonville, and Harvey Mitchell was the first worshipful master. Dr. Milliken was the first junior warden, and I won't read the rest of them. Brazos Union Lodge number 129 finally received its charter dated January 20th, 1854. The new lodge immediately went to work constructing a 2-story lodge building, which also housed the first public school. So the anniversary, the 100th anniversary of public education in Brazos County coincided with the first successful lodge. Harvey Mitchell, the master of the lodge, was the first schoolmaster. It later moved to downtown Bryan, and the lodge building is now situated between the Carnegie Library and the site of the old Palace Theater. Milliken. 2 lodges were formed in the thriving community of Milliken's Depot. Dr. Milliken had sold a portion of land in December 1859 for the Milliken town site, which became a boomtown full of railroad workers. A charter was issued for Ada Zilla Lodge, number 247 in 1860. The lodge survived about 22 years before it demised in 1882. And 16 years later, and I'm not sure why 16 years later, the town had another spurt, but it did. And they had another lodge, Milliken Lodge number 818, but it too surrendered its charter in 1915. The 4th lodge in Brazos County was organized at the community of Tryon Church. The Reverend J.M. Zimmerman donated land for both the church and the Masonic Lodge. So a dispensation for the new lodge was issued in June 1866. And the first worshipful master was J.M. Hood. Does anybody recognize that name?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Lynn Hudson was the first senior warden, and the Reverend Zimmerman was the first junior warden. John Hudson was secretary. J.P. Lloyd, senior deacon. I'm giving you these names because you recognize them. A charter for Cedar Creek Lodge number 300 was issued in 1867, and 40 years later, the lodge voted on November 2nd, 1906, to move from Old Tryon to the town of Curtin. That same day, the lodge conducted the funeral service for their member, Henry Curtin, a German immigrant for whom the town was named. The last lodge chartered in Brazos County during the 19th century was organized at Welborn. Early in the year 1894, Harvey Mitchell of Bryan assisted Adam Reuter in gathering 20 signatures on a petition for a lodge at Welborn. Reuter was a Bavarian immigrant who came to Brazos County in 1842 with his widowed mother. However, on March the 4th, 1894, before a dispensation for the new lodge could be issued, Adam Reuter died and was buried in Welborn. As a result, the new lodge, when it met, was named in his memory, and the charter for Adam Reuter Lodge number 778 was finally issued December 6, 1895. The lodge still meets in Welborn. The first officers were B.H. Peverly, Worshipful Master, Thomas Reuter, Senior Warden, G.R. Dickerson, Junior Warden, A.H. Eves, Treasurer, M.B. Lasky, Secretary, J.E. Farquhar, Senior Deacon, and others. And I'll tell you that I learned all of my Masonic work from Doug Reuter in his backyard on Grove Street back in the 70s. And he was secretary of that lodge for 50 years. And probably more than 50 years, but I know it was at least 50. In 1947, Sol Ross Lodge number 1300 was chartered in College Station, and I'll get back to that later. And I should not forget our newest lodge, which is St. Albans Lodge number 1455, chartered in 1992, which also meets in this building. Today, there are 5 lodges here in Brazos County, in Bryan, Curtin, Welborn, and 2 in College Station. From 1871, Masons were involved in the creation of the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas. Harvey Mitchell, the father of Brazos County, the first master of Brazos Union Lodge, worked diligently to locate the new college here in Brazos County. The original portrait of Harvey Mitchell hangs over the senior warden station in the lodge room in downtown Bryan. And the one that they have in the elementary school is a copy of that was donated to the school by the lodge. Mitchell Hall on the Texas A&M campus was named in his memory, and the Grand Lodge of Texas leveled the Masonic cornerstone of Mitchell Hall on May the 27th, 1912. Although Mitchell Hall is gone, the cornerstone still remains on a pedestal just off Military Walk next to the Butyl Health Center. Has anyone seen that? Okay, there's a few that have seen it. There's a couple of nice benches there. We had a big ceremony one day and we re-leveled it. Governor Richard Koch. The new A&M College opened its doors in 1876 in October, and the ceremonies that day were, presided over by Governor Richard Koch, a Mason and a member of Waco Lodge number 92. Governor Koch, affectionately known as Old Brains, delivered a stirring speech to the student body, part of which was still memorized when I was in school. And his words were, "To the students, let your watchword be duty. Know no other talisman of success than labor. Let honor be your guiding star in your dealings with your superiors, your fellows, with all. Be true to a trust, reposed at the needle to the pole. Stand by the right, even to the sacrifice of life itself, and learn that death is preferable to dishonor." And I used to do that in 5 seconds. Or the sophomores would want to know why. The first president of the new college was Thomas Gathright, a Georgia native and a graduate of Virginia Military Institute. I'm not sure about that. I got that out of the new book about the Corps. I'm still not certain that's accurate. Gathright had operated a private boys' school in Golson County, Mississippi, and was recommended for the A&M post by President Jefferson Davis. Only 6 months after the college opened its doors, President Gathright and others on the faculty had already begun crossing out the name Bryan on the college letterheads and inserting the words College Station. Well, we had a post office at the train station, and if you mailed your mail to Bryan, it'd take another week to get it. Gathright was a past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Mississippi, and I did not know that until one day I was at the A&M archives and I was talking to David Chapman, and he said, "Did you know Gathright was past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge?" I said, "I did not know that. We ought to have his picture hanging in this building." And I called a friend of mine who's an Aggie and a lawyer and lives in Henderson, Texas, and I said, "Russell, did you know that Gathright was past Grand Master of Mississippi?" And he said, "Pete, I'm looking at his grave out my window right now." And I said, "Oh, he's buried in Henderson." I didn't know that either, so there you go. And he was a member of Brazos Union Lodge here in Bryan during his years here. Bernard Sabiza was as important as any man on the A&M campus because he was the steward of the college for 49 years and he kept the boys fed. He joined the staff of the college in 1879 and was in charge of the mess hall. When the old mess hall was destroyed by fire on November the 11th, 1911, 11/11/11, a new dining hall, now known as Sabiza Dining Hall, was begun the following year. The Masonic cornerstone for Sabiza Dining Hall was leveled by the Grand Lodge of Texas on May the 26th, 1913. Bernard Sabiza was a member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan. Two other cornerstones which were leveled with Masonic ceremony include the cornerstones of the engineering building in 1909. I suppose that building's gone. And at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Bryan in 1912. As long as we're discussing dining halls on the A&M campus, I should mention that Duncan Dining Hall, the new dining hall that serves the new dorms, as the World War generation called them, was named for William A. Duncan. He appears on a list of the 1933-34 department heads as the supervisor of subsistence, indicating that he was in charge of what we now call food services. He was also a member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan. Lawrence Sullivan Ross, or Sul Ross, was the fifth president of the A&M College. His family settled in Milam County and then later in Waco. Educated at Florence Wesleyan in Alabama, he returned home and joined Waco Lodge 92, where both his father and brother were members. Enormously popular, he was elected governor in 1886 and was the first governor to occupy the new state capitol building. He left office in 1891 and accepted the presidency of the A&M College. The college saw rapid growth during his presidency as the people of Texas sent their sons to Governor Ross, and they sent their daughters over to Austin. Or Baylor, I suppose, I don't know. He died at home in College Station January 3rd, 1898, and the entire cadet corps escorted his remains back to the family cemetery in Waco. The statue of Governor Ross on the campus here was created by Italian sculptor Dr. Pompeo Capini, who immigrated to Texas. In addition to the statue of Sul Ross, some of his better known works are the massive Alamo Hero Cenotaph in San Antonio, the Littlefield War Memorial Fountain in Austin, and as he was an active Scottish Rite Mason, he also created the beautiful bronze doors of the San Antonio Scottish Rite Temple, which is just a couple of blocks from the Alamo. In the years following World War I, a number of returning veterans enrolled at the A&M College, and many of them were Masons. A search of the Texas A&M yearbooks during the 1920s and 30s reveals a number of students, faculty, and staff who were identified as Masons and members of the Texas A&M Masonic Club. Some of these students remained or returned to Texas A&M to serve on the faculty and staff and became well-known residents here. Some of these last names are now familiar as they often match campus buildings, city streets, and city parks. We're also fortunate that the minutes and records of the A&M Masonic Club survive. The following is a sampling of some of the names recognizable to those familiar with the history of Texas A&M that appear in the records of the club. And I just threw a bunch of names on there's a lot of names that are in these record books, and I just threw some in here together. Frank Anderson, coach of the A&M College track and field team. Colonel Ike Ashburn, hero of World War I and Commandant of Cadets, Ashburn Street. D.X. Bible, coach of the Texas Aggie football team. Dr. S.W. Bilsing, chairman of the entomology department. William B. Bazell, president of the college. John Edward Bloody Bloodworth, class of 1921. Otto Bowman, class of 1927 from Schulenburg. His son, Willie Bowman, is still a member of the lodge at Schulenburg. Francis C. Bolton, Dean of Engineering and later Dean of the A&M College, and then President from 1948 to 1950. Harry Boyer, class of 1931. David B. Kofer, Professor of English and the college archivist. H.C. Dillingham in the EE department. W.A. Duncan, who I mentioned, Director of the Aggie Land Inn. George Fairley, Director of the Aggie Band. Emil Fermier, Chairman of the ME Department. Marion Lewis Gaddis, class of 1921. Frederick Giesecke, Engineering Research Department. Charles C. Hedges, Dean of Chemistry. J. Clifton Hotard, Department of Food Services. Ernest Langford, Head of the Architecture Department. Thomas Leland, Head of the Accounting Department. W.E. Long, ME Department. Edwin J. Kyle, class of 1899, Chairman of Horticulture. Has a stadium named for him now. Joe Mogford, class of 1916. Tom Potts, class of 21. Bernard Sabiza, who I mentioned. George Summey Jr., Dean of the English Department. Cranford C.B. Cranny Warden, class of 1921, and many, many, many others. After the formation of the A&M Masonic Club in 1920, the members quickly raised enough money to purchase a half acre of land in the Northgate area from W.C. Boyette, with the intention of eventually organizing a Masonic lodge with a lodge building there. But during the 1930s, as the Great Depression took its toll on the finances of the club, those plans were put on hold. On December 18th, 1941, 11 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the remaining members of the A&M Masonic Club met on campus in the lecture room of the chemistry building, and W.A. Duncan presided, and the following new officers were elected. Harry Boyer, W.M. Sparks, Vice President, Harry Boyer, President, W.M. Sparks, Vice President, F.E. Lichty, Treasurer, and G.A. Long, Secretary. A motion was made by C.C. Hedges that the half-acre lot at the north gate be sold to the Methodist Church for $10,000. The 9 members present cast 9 votes in favor, and an additional 29 proxy votes were also cast in favor. The land is now the site of A&M United Methodist Church. Although this sale marked the end of the A&M Masonic Club in the early days of World War II, the club is commemorated today by the survival of Lodge Street, which parallels College, Main, just 1 block to the east and between University Drive and Church Street. Have you ever driven around and seen Lodge Street? That's what that was about. There was never a lodge there. It was a vacant lot. 4 Aggie Masons are commemorated by statues on the A&M campus. I've already listed Sully's statue. The next one I'll mention is that of E. King Gill, class of 1924, which stands in front of Kyle Field. He's the original 12th man and the reason that Aggies stand throughout the football games. He's the student who came down out of the stands and volunteered to suit up and take the field in the face of mounting injuries during the Dixie Classic football game, the forerunner of the Cotton Bowl, on January 2nd, 1922. The Aggies won that day, and football historians identify this game as the one that put the newly formed Southwest Conference on the football map. King Gill was later a member of Oak Cliff Lodge number 705. The third statue is that of Major General James Earl Rudder, class of 1932, president of Texas A&M from 1959 to 1970. He was a member of Parsons Lodge number 222 in Austin. And by the way, we have his 33rd degree hat out here in the display case. The fourth statue is that of Lieutenant General James F. Hollingsworth, class of 1940. He was one of the most decorated general officers in the U.S. and was a member of Union, or I think he's still alive, isn't he? I'm not sure. Is he? He was a member of Union Lodge number 7, Junction City, Kansas. Kyle Field, which I mentioned before, is named for Professor Edwin J. Kyle, class of 1899. Dean Kyle was chairman of the Athletic Council, Dean of Agriculture from 1911 to 1944, and was a member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan. Colonel Frank Anderson was track coach at A&M from 1922 to 1935, and again from 47 to 57. The Anderson Track and Field Complex is named for him. His Aggie track teams won 9 team conference championships during his 25 years as track coach. He was originally a member of Bolton Lodge number 326 in Mississippi, and later a member of Sul Ross Lodge here in College Station. Just outside the north entrance of Kyle Field for many years stood the DeWare Field House. It was named for Charles A. Charlie DeWare Sr., class of 1909, one of the great all-time athletes of Texas A&M. He was a member of Graham Lodge number 20 at Brenham. G. Raleigh White Coliseum, the Holler House on the Brazos, was home to Aggie basketball games for many years. In examining the Masonic records of G. Raleigh White, class of 1895, at Brady Lodge number 628, I discovered that his middle name, which we always see spelled R-O-L-L-I-E, is actually a nickname because his real name is Raleigh, R-A-L-E-I-G-H, just like Sir Walter Raleigh. And you wouldn't know that if you hadn't seen his Masonic petition or his birth certificate, I guess. And by the way, I think the high school football stadium in Brady, Texas is called G. Raleigh White Stadium. Pat Olson Field, home to the Aggie baseball team, is named for C.E. Pat Olson, class of 1923, a professional baseball player and later a successful businessman in his hometown of Clifton, Texas. Before he retired and moved to College Station, he was a member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan. I've already talked about 3 presidents of Texas A&M, Thomas Gathright, Governor Ross, and General Rudder. But I want to mention some others whose names you may or may not remember. In 1898, following the death of President Ross, Lafayette Lumpkin Foster. Now, I didn't know this until yesterday. Roy Smith called me on the phone and told me this yesterday, so I had to add it. Lafayette Lumpkin Foster, L.L. Foster, former Speaker of the Texas House, was installed as President of Texas A&M. July 1st, 1898, and served 3.5 years until his untimely death in Dallas, December 2nd, 1901. A member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan, he was buried with Masonic honors in the newly dedicated campus cemetery, which was located in the present vicinity of Duncan Dining Hall. The graves in the cemetery were later moved to another location west of the railroad tracks in 1938. And if you've been watching the news lately, you know that they're going to move them again to the new Aggie Field of Honor. That's who L.L. Foster was. William B. Bazell was president of Texas A&M from 1914 to 1925. Bazell Hall, the oldest building on the A&M campus, is named for him. He went on to serve as president of the University of Oklahoma for 16 years and was a member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan. I think the library at OU is named for him now. Frank Bolton was Dean of Engineering and later Dean of the A&M College. He was president of the college during the 1940s. Bolton Hall on the campus was named for him. He was a member of Brazos Union Lodge in Bryan and a charter member of Sul Ross Lodge here in College Station. M.T. Harrington, class of 22, affectionately known as Bigfoot Tom, was a professor of chemistry, dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, dean of the college, and president during the 1950s. The M.T. Harrington Education Center is named for him, and he was a charter member of Sul Ross Lodge. Gib Gilchrist, Dean of the School of Engineering, served as president of the A&M College from 1944 to 1948 when he was elected the first chancellor of the A&M system. A native of Wills Point in Van Zandt County, he was a World War I veteran and served as the head of the Texas Highway Department in the 1920s and 30s, where he was largely responsible for modernizing the Texas highway system. Some may remember that for many years, one of the Galveston-Bolivar ferries was named the Gib Gilchrist. He was originally a member of Tucker Lodge, number 297 in Galveston. President Gilchrist and a number of other professors and staff at the college, along with a number of other College Station residents, organized Sul Ross Lodge in College Station during the spring of '47. Gilchrist was installed as the first worshipful master of the lodge in a ceremony held in Sabisa Dining Hall in May of '47. And one day I was talking to Head Davis, the attorney in Bryan, and he said, yeah, I was a student and I went to that. And I went, really? He told me all about it. All the deans and almost all the department heads were charter members of the new lodge. A year and a half later, in December 1948, he was elected Grand Junior Warden of the Grand Lodge of Texas. Now I want you to think about this. Gib Gilchrist had never been master of the lodge when he was installed as master of Sul Ross in May of '47. He served 1 year, went out of office in the summer of '48, and 6 months later was elected Grand Junior Warden of the Grand Lodge of Texas 6 months after he went out of office here. Okay? And he progressed through the Grand Lodge line offices in regular succession and was elected and installed as Grand Master of Masons in Texas 3 years later, serving in the calendar year 1952, the only Brazos County Mason to ever hold that office. Gilchrist's office desk, chair, and matching library table, which were made for him by prisoners in the state prison at Huntsville during his term as head of the Texas Highway Department, were donated to the Brazos Valley Masonic Library Museum, where they are now displayed. And if you go into the library, when we get through here, you can see his desk. And be sure and turn around and look at the library table. The little brass feet on the bottom of the table match the brass feet on the bottom of the desk. They go together. We're very happy to have those. The desk is decorated on the front panel with the bronze star and wreath from the Texas State Seal. The new lodge met in the top floor of the old American Legion Hall on the south side of the campus, just west of the intersection of Houston Street and Jersey Street, now George Bush Drive. In a few short years, the lodge purchased the Dan Russell building at 312 Jersey, across the street, at the Southgate Shopping Center, where it remained for almost 50 years. And when you go into the library, look in the display cabinet, and you'll see the architectural model that shows the old American Legion Hall that sat on the campus. You know, it was later the KK's office, and then now I guess the A&M Foundation sits there, okay? And the lodge met on the very top floor. It was actually kind of an attic, and they had to go in and finish it out, and the ceiling was literally like a 6-foot ceiling. And in Masonic lodges, you're supposed to have 3 steps here for the master and 2 steps for the senior warden and 1 step for the junior warden. It's kind of a tradition. Well, you couldn't have 3 steps because the ceiling was like here. So what they did was they made steps out of 1/2-inch plywood. So you had 3 steps and each one was a 1/2-inch step. They were legal. They were legal, right? Is there anybody here that knew Joe Wolcott? Remembers Joe Wolcott? We used to have a photograph of him that hung over the secretary's desk, and he always had that plaid jacket, that loud plaid jacket. D.A. Andy Anderson, professor of forestry, was a charter member of the new lodge in College Station, and he also served as mayor. The D.A. Andy Anderson Arboretum in College Station is named for him. Fred Bryson, former professor of horticulture, is another member of Sul Ross Lodge with a city park named for him. Time does not permit a full accounting of the Masonic affiliations of other well-known professors, alumni, and College Station residents who were members of the Masonic fraternity. However, let me list a few just before closing. I've already mentioned Ernest Langford, Clifton Hotard, and some of these I mentioned because there's buildings named for them. You may remember Hotard Hall. James V. Pinky Wilson, class of 1920, wrote the Aggie War Hymn while serving in the Army in France during World War II. He was a member of Florence Lodge number 338 in Williamson County.